She was 19 and had been put out of her father's house with nothing more than a small canvas bag and the clothes on her back. She had no family left to turn to, no plan, and only $12 folded carefully in her pocket. And with that $12, she bought a derelict stone cabin in a remote mountain valley, a place everyone said was cursed. But what nobody knew, what she was about to discover, was that hidden beneath the cabin's broken hearthstone was something that would not only explain the curse, but change her life forever. If you believe in the power of forgotten places and the strength of a quiet heart, follow our channel for more stories like Eliza's. Eliza Mayhew was born in the spring of 1888 in a small, tidy house on the eastern edge of the town of Mill Creek. Her mother, Eleanor, was a woman who seemed to carry the scent of wildflowers and baked bread with her wherever she went, and she taught Eliza the names of the constellations and the birds that nested in the eaves of their home. Her father, Thomas Mayhew, was a clerk for the lumber company, a man of neat ledgers and quiet habits, whose love for his daughter was genuine but expressed in shy, infrequent gestures. For the first 7 years of her life, Eliza's world was small and secure, held together by the rhythm of her mother's humming and the predictable scratch of her father's pen in the evenings. Then, in the autumn of her 7th year, a fever swept through the town, and Eleanor was taken by it. The house fell silent, the scent of wildflowers faded, and Thomas Mayhew retreated further into his ledgers, as if the columns of numbers could impose order on a world that had become unbearably chaotic. A year later, he married Agnes, a widow from a neighboring town, a woman as practical and unadorned as a riverstone. Agnes kept a clean house and managed the budget with fierce efficiency, but she looked at Eliza as another column in the ledger, an expense to be managed, a duty to be fulfilled. In this quiet, emotionally barren landscape, Eliza found a strange and unexpected refuge in the workshop of their neighbor, Silas Blackwood. Silas was a carpenter and widower in his late 60s, a man who had outlived his wife and his only son. His hands were gnarled and stained with wood pitch, but they moved with a slow, certain grace. He spoke little, but he saw the watchful, lonely girl who stood at the edge of his property, peering into the open doors of his workshop. He never invited her in with words. One afternoon, he simply set a small block of soft pine and a whittling knife on a stump just inside the doorway and went back to his work. Eliza hesitated for a long time before she picked them up. From that day forward, the workshop became her school and her sanctuary. Silas taught her everything he knew, not through lectures, but through quiet demonstration. He showed her how to read the grain of a piece of oak, how to feel the readiness of a freshly sharpened plane blade with the ball of her thumb. She learned the different sounds a handsaw makes biting into maple versus pine, and the precise, satisfying tap of a mallet seating a mortise and tenon joint. He taught her how to mix lime mortar, how to judge its consistency by the way it clung to the trowel, and how to lay a fieldstone so it would hold for a century. He never praised her directly, but when she successfully cut her first dovetail joint, he ran his calloused finger over the interlocking pieces and gave a single, slow nod. That nod was more precious to Eliza than any ribbon or award. For her 16th birthday, he gave her a small carving knife of his own making. The blade was fine Swedish steel, and the handle was carved from a piece of apple wood from his own yard, worn smooth and dark with linseed oil. It fit her hand perfectly. It was the only gift she had ever received that felt like it was truly meant for her. It was a tool, not a trinket, a recognition of her competence, of the capable person he saw her becoming. She kept it with her always. The day she was cast out was a Tuesday in late September. She had spent the morning helping Silas repair a fence, and she walked home with the satisfying ache of good work in her shoulders. But when she reached the house, she found the front door locked. This was unusual. On the porch sat her small canvas bag, the one she used for carrying books or supplies. Pinned to it was a folded piece of paper. Her heart did not race. It simply grew still and heavy in her chest, a cold, smooth stone. She recognized the sharp, economical handwriting of her stepmother, Agnes. The note was brief. "Eliza," it read, "you are 19 now, a woman grown. It is time you made your own way in the world. Your father and I have done our duty by you. Your things are in this bag. We wish you well, but do not return here. It would be an inconvenience." There was no signature, but none was needed. She looked through the front window and saw her father sitting at the dining table, his back to her, staring down at one of his ledgers. He did not turn. He did not move. He was a man locked inside his own quiet prison of grief and weakness. Eliza felt a deep, hollow ache, but no tears came. Crying would not change the locked door or the words on the paper. It would not make her father turn around. She had learned from Silas that you do not waste energy on things you cannot fix. You assess the material you have, you take up your tools, and you begin the work that is in front of you. She unpinned the note, folded it, and put it in her pocket. She slid the smooth handle of Silas's carving knife from its sheath, just to feel its familiar weight in her palm. Then she shouldered the small bag, which contained a change of clothes, a bar of soap, and a worn copy of a book her mother had loved. She turned her back on the only house she had ever known, and began to walk west, toward the mountains that rose like a dark promise against the afternoon sky. The road unspooled before her, a ribbon of dust and packed earth leading away from everything familiar. For the first 2 days, she walked through rolling farmland, past tidy homesteads with smoke curling from their chimneys. The smells were of hay and livestock, of wood smoke and damp earth. No one paid her much mind. A young woman walking with a purpose was not an uncommon sight. She slept in barns when she could find one open, burrowing into the hay for warmth, and she ate the last of the bread and cheese she'd had in her pocket. She bought a little more at a crossroads store with a few of the coins she'd saved from odd jobs. The physical act of walking was a strange comfort. The steady rhythm of her own feet on the road, the swing of her arms, the deep pull of air into her lungs. It was a kind of work, and work was something she understood. It kept the hollowness in her chest from consuming her entirely. On the 3rd day, the landscape began to change. The gentle hills gave way to steeper inclines, and the farms grew smaller and farther apart. The air grew thinner, sharper, scented with pine and the cold mineral tang of stone. The road became a track, winding its way up into the foothills of the Cobalt Mountains. This was unfamiliar territory, wilder and more formidable than the neat world she had left behind. She saw deer moving like ghosts through the trees at dusk and heard the cry of a hawk circling high overhead. She felt small here, but not afraid. The vastness of the mountains was an honest thing. It didn't pretend to be welcoming, it simply was. It made the quiet cruelty of her father's house seem petty and distant. She was walking toward Whisper Creek Valley, a place she had only heard of in passing. A remote valley rumored to have good water and unclaimed land. On the evening of the 4th day, she crested a high ridge and saw it spread out below her. The valley was a deep green bowl carved between 2 towering peaks, a silver creek winding through its center. A handful of lights twinkled near the valley mouth, a tiny settlement clinging to the edge of the wilderness. She stood there for a long time as the sun set, bathing the peaks in shades of rose and violet. She felt a stillness settle over her, the first she had felt since finding the note on her bag. This was a place where a person could start over. This was a place where a person could build something that was their own. She adjusted the bag on her shoulder and began the long walk down into the valley. The settlement at the mouth of Whisper Creek was little more than a general store, a blacksmith's forge, and a half-dozen houses. The man who ran the store also served as the land agent. His name was Arthur Abernathy, a man whose face was a roadmap of wrinkles and whose suspenders seemed to be the only thing holding his stooped frame together. He peered at Eliza over a pair of spectacles perched on the end of his nose. "Looking for work?" he asked, his voice a dry rustle. "I'm looking for a place," Eliza said, her own voice steady. "Some land. A cabin, maybe." Abernathy grunted and pulled a large, leather-bound book from under the counter. "Not much for sale. The Miller place is spoken for. The old logging camp is too far up canyon. There is one property." He paused, tapping a long finger on a page. "The Vance place. Stone cabin, 5 acres, right on the creek. Been empty for 10 years now." "Why has it been empty so long?" Eliza asked. He took off his spectacles and polished them on his shirt. "Bad luck follows that place. Esther and Samuel Vance built it. Good people. Lost their boy, Daniel, to the winter fever. A year later, Samuel was killed in a rock slide at the old silver mine. Esther, she stayed on for another year, all alone. Then one day, she was just gone. Packed a bag and walked out. No one ever saw her again. Folks say the place holds on to its grief. They call it the cursed cabin. No one who's tried to live there since has stayed more than a season." Eliza was quiet for a moment, thinking of the grief that haunted her own father's house. A place that held its grief openly seemed more honest somehow. "How much?" she asked. Abernathy looked at her worn dress and the small bag at her feet. "The county wants $12 for the deed, just to clear it from the books." It was every cent she had. "I'll take it," she said, without hesitation. He stared at her, then shrugged, as if the folly of youth was a force of nature beyond his control. He filled out the deed in a spidery hand, and Eliza counted out her $12 onto the worn wooden counter. The cabin was a mile up the creek from the settlement. The path was overgrown, but the sound of the water was a constant, soothing companion. And then she saw it. It was set back from the creek in a small clearing, nestled against a stand of tall ponderosa pines. The foundation and lower walls were made of large, expertly fitted river stones, a testament to Samuel Vance's skill. The upper walls were sturdy logs, now grayed with weather. The sod roof was overgrown with grass and wildflowers, but the ridgepole looked straight and true. One window was broken, a dark, gaping eye, and the heavy plank door hung crookedly from a single leather hinge. Weeds choked what had once been a small garden. Others saw a ruin, a place of bad luck and sorrow. Eliza saw the good bones. She saw the work of Silas in the tight-fitting stonework and the notched logs. She saw a place that had been built with love and skill, a place that was simply waiting for a pair of capable hands to tend to it again. She walked to the crooked door, pushed it open, and stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of dust, damp earth, and the faint, lingering scent of a long dead wood fire. It was the smell of a place that had been waiting. For the first few weeks, Eliza worked from dawn until dusk, fueled by a fierce and quiet determination. She swept out the years of accumulated dust, leaves, and mouse nests. She used Silas's knife to cut away the rotted leather hinge on the door, and after a full day of labor, re-hung it using new hinges she fashioned from scavenged strap iron she'd found near the old mine. She patched the hole in the roof, weaving a mat of willow branches and packing it with fresh sod and clay from the creek bank. She spent 2 days carefully removing the broken shards of glass from the window frame and fitting a new pane she bought from Mr. Abernathy with the first dollar she earned doing mending for his wife. The cabin was small, just a single room about 16 feet square, with a sleeping loft above. But it was solid, and with each small repair, it felt more like her own. The heart of the cabin was the large stone hearth that took up most of the back wall. It was a magnificent thing, built for warmth and cooking, but it had a serious flaw. The hearthstone itself, a single massive slab of flat granite, was cracked clear across the middle and had settled unevenly, creating a dangerous tripping hazard and a place for embers to escape. It had to be fixed before she could safely use the fireplace for the winter. This was work that tested the limits of her strength. She found a long, sturdy log to use as a lever and a smaller, rounded stone for a fulcrum. Day after day, she worked at it, slowly, patiently, inching the massive stone upward. Finally, with a great groaning sound, the stone lifted free of its bed of sand and earth. And there, in the hollowed-out space beneath where the center of the stone had rested, was a small, dark object wrapped in oilskin. It was a package, about the size of a loaf of bread, tied securely with twine. Her first thought was that it was a surveyor's mark, or something left by the builders. But it felt too deliberate, too carefully placed. With hands trembling slightly from exertion and a sudden sharp curiosity, she carried the package to the doorway where the light was better. She used Silas's knife to carefully slit the twine. She peeled back the stiff, waxy layers of oilskin. Inside was a small, neatly stacked pile of $20 gold coins, their surfaces gleaming dully in the afternoon light. Beneath the coins was a folded letter, the paper yellowed with age, and resting beside it was a single, smooth, dark riverstone, the kind a child might pick up and save for its perfect shape. She carefully unfolded the letter. The handwriting was clear and steady. A woman's hand. It began, "To whoever finds this, in this house I built with my husband, Samuel. My name is Esther Vance. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and the world has not gone as I had hoped." Eliza sat down on the threshold, the cool stone beneath her, and began to read the story of the house, the story of the curse. The letter was dated June of 1878. "My husband Samuel and I came to this valley with our son, Daniel, who was then 6 years old," Esther wrote. "We built this cabin with our own hands, stone by stone, log by log. Samuel was a stonemason, and he said the stones of this creek were the strongest he had ever seen. For 5 years, this was a happy place. Daniel loved this valley more than anyone. He would spend his days exploring the creek, and his pockets were always full of treasures. Smooth stones, bird feathers, strangely shaped twigs. This dark, smooth stone was his favorite. He called it his lucky stone. We were saving for his future. Every extra dollar we earned, we put away. Samuel worked part-time at the silver mine, and I sold butter and eggs in the settlement. We dreamed of sending Daniel to a school in the East, to become a doctor or an engineer, to have a life bigger than this valley. This money, $180 in gold, was for him. It was his future, hidden here under the heart of our home." The tone of the letter shifted, the careful script becoming slightly less steady. "Then came the winter of '77. A fever took our boy. He was gone in 3 days. The light went out of this house, out of our lives. Samuel kept working, but his heart was broken. He became reckless at the mine. The following spring, there was a rock slide. He was gone too. I was left alone in this house we built together, surrounded by ghosts and the future we had saved for, a future that would never come. This money became a weight, a constant reminder of all I had lost. I could not spend it. It was Daniel's. And so, I am leaving it here. I am leaving this valley to find a place where the memories are not in every stone and every gust of wind. I do not know where I am going, but I leave this here with a prayer. To whoever finds this, I hope you are in need. I hope you are building a life here. Use this money to make this house a home again. Use it to build a future. Do not let this place be a place of sorrow. Let it be a place of new beginnings. Look after our home. And please, if you have a moment, take Daniel's lucky stone down to the creek for him. Let it feel the water one more time. May your life here be blessed with peace. Eliza sat for a long time, the letter in her lap, the heavy gold coins in one hand and the small, cool stone in the other. The cabin was no longer just a structure of wood and stone. It was a vessel of love and loss, a repository of a family's broken dreams. The curse wasn't a malevolent spirit. It was the profound, lingering weight of Esther Vance's sorrow, a grief so heavy she could not bear to stay. Eliza looked around the dusty room, at the solid stone walls Samuel had built, at the hearth that had protected his family's future. She felt a deep and binding connection to these people she had never met. She was not an intruder here. She was an heir. Esther's hope had lain dormant under the stone for a decade, waiting for someone to find it. And it had found her. She closed her eyes and made a silent promise to the ghosts of the Vance family. She would not let this be a place of sorrow. She would build a new beginning. The discovery of Esther's savings changed everything. It was not just the money, though the $180 was a small fortune that lifted the crushing weight of precarity from her shoulders. It was the purpose the letter gave her. She was no longer just a survivor seeking shelter. She was a custodian, tasked with honoring the legacy of the family who had built this place. Her work took on a new, reverent quality. The next morning, she walked into the settlement with a new confidence in her step. She went to Mr. Abernathy's store and bought the things she truly needed: a good quality axe head, a sack of nails, a bag of lime for mortar, and a dozen cedar shingles. Mr. Abernathy looked at the gold coin she placed on the counter, his eyebrows rising nearly to his hairline, but he asked no questions. The people of these mountains respected privacy. Her first major project was the hearth. She knew from Silas that a cracked hearthstone was a house fire waiting to happen. She needed help. She asked Mr. Abernathy who the best stonemason in the valley was. "That would be Jedediah Stone," he said, a faint smile touching his lips. "Man's name matches his trade. Lives up the North Fork." Eliza found him working on a new foundation for the blacksmith's shop. He was an older man, quiet and weathered, with hands as large and solid as mallets. She explained her problem, expecting to hire him. He listened patiently, then said, "I knew Samuel Vance. He was a good man and a better mason. I'll come take a look." He arrived at her cabin the next day. He inspected the cracked stone and the foundation of the hearth, running his hand over Samuel's work with an expert's appreciation. "Good work," he murmured. "Solid." He showed her how to mix the lime mortar to the perfect consistency, not with measurements, but by feel. Together they cleaned the hollow beneath the hearth, and Eliza told him, simply, that she had found something left behind by the previous owner. He just nodded. They decided the cracked stone was too great a risk. Over the next 3 days, Jedediah helped her select, move, and fit 3 smaller, perfectly flat stones to replace the single large one. He taught her how to use shims to level them and how to tool the mortar joints for a clean, tight seal. He refused any payment. "Call it a professional courtesy," he said, looking at the finished hearth. "For Samuel." With the hearth secure, she turned her attention to the walls. The chinking between the logs had crumbled away in many places, leaving gaps for the wind to whistle through. She spent a week down by the creek, mixing a slurry of clay, sand, and dried grass, just as Silas had shown her. She packed the mixture into the gaps with her hands and a small trowel. It was slow, messy, satisfying work. Each sealed gap was a victory against the coming winter. She built furniture from salvaged wood she found at the abandoned mine site. A sturdy table, a 3-legged stool, and a bed frame in the loft. She used the joinery Silas had taught her, cutting mortise and tenon joints that fit together snugly without a single nail. The work was hard, but it filled her days and quieted her mind. Every evening, she would light a small fire in her new, safe hearth, and the cabin would fill with a warm, flickering light. It was becoming a home. As the cabin slowly came back to life, so too did Eliza's connection to the small community around her. Her solitary labor had not gone unnoticed. People were accustomed to seeing the Vance place as a decaying monument to sorrow, a place to be hurried past. Now they saw a thin but steady plume of smoke rising from the chimney each morning. They saw a neatly patched roof and a solid, straight-hanging door. They saw work, and in this valley, work was a language everyone understood and respected. The first to bridge the distance was Sarah Miller, a farmer's wife from down the valley. She appeared at Eliza's door one afternoon holding a basket covered with a checkered cloth. She was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and work-roughened hands. "I saw your smoke," she said, her voice warm. "Thought you might be tired of your own cooking." Inside the basket were a fresh loaf of sourdough bread, a jar of blackberry preserves, and a wedge of cheese. It was more than just food. It was an offering of welcome. Eliza, unaccustomed to such open kindness, could only manage a quiet thank you. But the gratitude in her eyes was clear. Aurora just smiled. "We look after our own here." The visit became a weekly ritual. Sarah would bring bread or fresh eggs, and Eliza would give her a small bundle of the wild mint she'd found growing by the creek. They rarely spoke for long, but a bond of quiet friendship formed in those small exchanges. Jedediah Stone came by a few weeks later, ostensibly to check on the hearth. He brought with him a box of old, but well-cared-for tools that had belonged to his father: a draw knife, an adze, a set of wood chisels. "No use them sitting in my barn," he said gruffly, avoiding her eyes. "A tool needs to be used." Eliza took them with reverence, knowing the immense value of such a gift. She used the draw knife to shape new legs for a bench and the chisels to carve a small shelf to hold her few possessions. Even old Mr. Abernathy seemed to thaw. When she came into the store to buy seeds for a small garden, he added a packet of marigold seeds to her bag. "For luck," he said. "My wife swears by them." The townsfolk stopped calling her cabin the Vance place or the cursed cabin. Now, when they gave directions, they would say, "Go on past Eliza Mayhew's place." She had a name. She had a place. The ghosts of the cabin had not been exorcised. They had been honored. The sorrow had not been erased. It had been integrated into a new story of resilience and renewal. One crisp autumn afternoon, as she was splitting firewood, she fulfilled the last part of her promise to Esther. She took the small, dark river stone from the shelf where she kept it, walked down to the creek, and knelt at the water's edge. She held the stone in the cold, clear current, letting the water rush over it, just as it had when a little boy named Daniel had first picked it up. She didn't say any words aloud, but she sent a silent message of peace out into the quiet valley. The stone, now clean and dark, felt like a connection, a link in a chain of care that stretched back through time. The first snow of winter arrived in early December, falling in thick, silent flakes that blanketed the valley in white. Inside her cabin, Eliza was warm and secure. A stew made with dried beans and a piece of salted pork she'd bought at the store simmered over the fire, filling the single room with a rich, savory steam. The fire crackled in the hearth that she and Jedediah Stone had rebuilt, its stones radiating a deep, steady warmth. The wind howled outside, rattling the pines, but inside, all was calm. The walls, freshly chinked with her own hands, held the wind at bay. The light from the fire danced across the log walls, across the simple, sturdy furniture she had built, across the small shelf next to the hearth. On that shelf sat two objects, side by side. One was the carving knife Silas Blackwood had given her, its applewood handle worn to a deep, familiar patina. It represented the skills she had been taught, the quiet belief of a kind old man who had seen her worth when no one else had. It was the tool that had allowed her to begin. The other object was the smooth, dark river stone that had belonged to Daniel Vance. It represented the gift she had been given, the unexpected grace of a stranger who had turned her own profound loss into a hope for the future. It was the means that had allowed her to build. She sat on her stool, looking from one object to the other, and felt the threads of her life pulling together. She thought of her father, a man trapped by his own sorrow, unable to see past the ledger of his own loss. She thought of her stepmother, for whom life was a series of transactions, of duties performed and columns balanced. Theirs was a cold and brittle world. And then she thought of the warmth that surrounded her now. The warmth of Silas's unspoken faith. The warmth of Esther Vance's desperate, beautiful hope. The warmth of Jedediah's gruff generosity and Sarah Miller's quiet friendship. They were a family of a different kind, one forged not by blood, but by shared work, by mutual respect, by the simple, profound act of showing up for one another. The world had cast her out with nothing, but in this forgotten cabin, in this valley at the edge of the world, she had found everything. She had found a home. She had found a community. She had found herself. Eliza Mayhew was 19 and had been put out on her own. She had $12 to her name, and she spent it all on a cursed cabin in Whisper Creek Valley. It was the best $12 she ever spent. The story of Eliza Mayhew is a reminder that a home is more than just a shelter. It is a place we build, both with our hands and with our hearts. It shows that what one person sees as a curse, another can see as an opportunity for care and renewal. If this story of finding a future in a place others had abandoned resonated with you, please consider subscribing to our channel and sharing it with someone who appreciates the quiet strength of the human spirit. And we leave you with this thought. What have you found of value in a place or a person that others had already given up on?